Welcome to the Tennis IQ podcast. I'm Josh Berger.
And I'm Brian Lomax. And today, Josh and I are continuing our series on the educational needs of parents in tennis. This is part 3. And we are going to be talking about really the role of parents, on match day, competition day, and what the competition needs are. Just to go back to some of the other things that we've already discussed in the previous 2 parts. So the first part, we talked about the difficulties of tennis parenting. So if you want to go back and listen to that, if you haven't listened to it, please do that. And then in part 2, we talked more about some of the areas of educational need for parents so they can best navigate the situation. And then today we're going to get into, all right, what are the needs of players in competition so that, we're all really on the same page about what we want. And so, recognizing, again, this is a difficult process when we're doing that. So we're going to, just to remind people, we're using a particular paper as background for this. The title of the paper is Educating and Supporting Tennis Parents, a Grounded Theory of Parents' Needs During Childhood and Early Adolescence. The authors are Sam Thrower, Chris Harwood, and Chris Spray. And today we're actually going to bring in a couple more resources on this. One is, a newsletter that if you are on Substack and subscribe to various things on Substack, check out the Growth Equation newsletter. And we're looking at an article that was written there called How to Save Youth Sports Manifesto. And then we are also looking at a resource from Positive Coaching Alliance, PCA, who has a nice one-page parent game day tips. And we'll look at some of those. Both of those are more sport neutral, they're not tennis specific, but a lot of what's in those, the article or the handout, very applicable to the situation in tennis.
And if anyone wants to review these, feel free to just email us at tennisiqpodcast@gmail.com, and we're happy to send it to you.
Absolutely. So, Josh, let's get into, before we, jump into pre-match role, in-match role, post-match role, let's just sort of talk about the role for the day of the parent. We have mentioned in previous parts of this series that parents are also performers. They need to see themselves as athletes. And I think that's a good reminder going into the day, because if you have a morning match, afternoon match, it really doesn't matter. But, you are also performing on this day. And we'll kind of connect with that through the different stages of a match. But any sort of preliminary thoughts from you about the role of the parent on this day?
Yeah, I think it really is, that the parent is performing too. And I think that's an important place to start because, obviously a lot of focus goes on to the kid in terms of, them playing, them trying to do their best to win the match, to try to put themselves in the best position and try to perform well, which includes obviously the mental pieces of handling pressure, handling frustration and emotions, handling different challenges that might come up in terms of line calls and, possible cheating and wind and sun and these different challenges. But also as a parent, you are dealing with, a lot of different challenges out there as well. And it's on you to be performing as well in these situations, right? Whether it's handling pressure and nerves, whether it's handling emotions, whether it's handling, the thought that your kid's opponent might be making line calls that aren't correct, right? Whatever it is, there are different challenges for parents to encounter and try to handle in the best possible way. And it's on them to, to be able to really view it as a performance. And I think if it's viewed as a performance, and if, as performers, they're able to apply different skills to that performance, things, different sorts of mental skills, could be self-talk, could be breathing, could be even visualizing ahead of time how they want to handle tough situations that can and will come up. I think if viewed in that way, it becomes easier to ultimately handle it in a way that parent can be proud of. I mean, I think there's so many examples of parents who maybe, are letting their emotions get to them, right? Or are showing outward frustration or negative body language. And I think if parents can view being there at a tournament as a performance in itself, it becomes easier to conduct themselves in a way that they'll be proud of, and really, lead by example in terms of their kids being able to learn something from them. And I think you mentioned this actually when we were, before the show when we were discussing it, but in a certain way, it can be, we don't want to be hypocritical with the way that, we're telling our kids to do certain things, handle your emotions well. There's going to be ups and downs, all of that. And then the kid looks to their parent who is outwardly showing their frustration. So rather than, that potential hypocrisy, trying to, really hone in your own mental skills so that you can handle your own performance as well as you possibly can.
And I think I've said this in one of the past episodes that to me, I see the role of the parent and the coach as well as not being in the performance, but being outside of it, being the observer of the performance. And the role is not to judge and criticize. The role is to guide the player through the very difficult experiences that he or she will encounter out there. It's letting them fail and then helping them through it. It's letting them deal with difficult situations and not solving them for them and then helping them through it, because these things will happen again. And, me saying that's very easy to say, but it's hard to remain detached. It's hard to put yourself in the place of the observer and let it happen, knowing that, okay, my role here today is actually to help my son or daughter deal with these things better in the future. It's not to fix it right now. It's not to protect them. It's not to not let them experience something unpleasant or unfair. Because as being the guide, the goal of something like tennis, when in the right environment, is to help that young person become a fully functional adult that can handle adversity, that can deal with challenges, that understands the nature of competition and sport, and actually really high performance. Most people who are in the tennis industry, especially in the youth tennis industry, don't understand what high performance really is. High performance athletes don't focus primarily on winning. They don't focus on prestige or, telling somebody, oh yeah, I'm a really good player. I play, national tournaments. They focus more on their systems. They focus more on figuring out the right process and behaviors and always learning and improving, seeing the game as practice. Those are the principles of high performance, but you rarely get exposed to that. And so as a parent, as a performer, you have to bring a high performance mentality to the situation. Not, for lack of a better term, Josh, an ordinary mentality. An ordinary mentality is you got to win today, or emphasizing winning, or criticizing after the match what went on out there. That's we're focused on the wrong thing, right? That's not about high performance. That's about winning today. And in the 12s and the 14s and even the 16s, who cares? That's not the point. The point is the growth. So if we can all connect with this idea of that we're the observer, we're the guide, we're like the steward here. We are helping our player through life and its challenges, using tennis as a vehicle for that, right? So I think if we can come at it that way, we're a performer, right? We need mental skills, we need energy management skills, and knowing your role, maybe this gets a little bit easier. You mentioned maybe some visualization. I think that's a great idea. Being ready for a lot of these things that go wrong. So I think we'll cover some of that as we go through the different stages. So let's jump into what should happen in the pre-match stage. That might be the car ride there, maybe the first few minutes at the site. What are some important reminders, Josh, for parents in terms of how we want them to be in this pre-match stage?
I mean, I think one thing is to, be able to convey to their kid that, that unconditional love, right? That, yeah, I love you no matter what happens out there. It's not based on that result. You don't have to prove something to us, or, you're not gonna let me down or let us down based on your result out there. Go out there, do your best, and we can talk more specifically about what doing your best is, right? Not just this sort of vague idea, but, kind of like what you were talking about with those principles of performance excellence, right? Where, somebody doing their best has, I think, a specific meaning mentally and physically. And we can, get into the specifics of that. But, it being more about somebody doing their best rather than results. I think, part of the parent's role is to help the kid take pressure off of themselves because there's so much pressure out there, right? There's pressure from the scoring system of tennis itself. There's pressure from being in a tournament. There's pressure within peers. Their coaches can add pressure at times. So I think part of the parent's role is definitely not to add pressure, but actually to help take away pressure. And what do you know if people play with less pressure, they're going to end up playing better and giving themselves a better chance to perform well. So I think part of it is, conveying that unconditional love and support, and then also being able to yeah, to really keep the kids focus on their process and doing things in the right way as much as possible. And again, not just this vague idea, but having specific maybe process goals that they can focus on, right? Maybe their process goals are, I want to use my self-talk as a tool. I want to spend my time between points resetting and using my routine. I want to, try to attack every ball with intent, right? So whatever it is, okay, maybe part of that discussion before a match is just going over those process goals with them. But again, making it more about that rather than winning and losing and results and UTRs. I think one thing to definitely be aware of or avoid are things like, you need to win. You have to win. You're supposed to win this match. I think oftentimes when it comes to rankings and ratings, it's like, oh, well, you're above this person, right? Which I think a lot of people know what that means, but people say that, right, in terms of UTR, right? You're zero point 0.5 or 1 point above this your opponent. Okay, you should win this match. You're supposed to win. So I think being aware of that and avoiding that way of thinking, I think, is really, really key. And instead trying to keep it on the support piece and the process piece as much as possible.
I love the fact that you're bringing up the role to reduce pressure. 100% agree. And that's something that coaches can also help with, because I think if we were to give some, things to talk about in addition to what you said already, we want the player to play in this match as they play in practice. So often people like you and me hear, oh, so and so plays way better in practice than in competition. Like, yeah, no kidding. Right? That's like nearly everybody says that.
And that was in your blog post, right? It's
right.
I like the quote. It was like said something like I play better in practice than matches. And then who's it by? Nearly everybody.
Yeah, exactly. It's very rare that I run into somebody who says the opposite. It has happened, but that's like 99% people play better in practice. So by reducing the pressure, we, I think, enable a better chance of playing that way. We enable through the process goals too, Josh, that the player will play as their coach would like them to play. There's a great quote in the article from Thrower, Harwood, and Spray, where a coach said that winning is pointless if you play the wrong way. And we see that so much especially in the 12s and the 14s. Yeah, okay, you've won a 12 and under match, but did you do anything today to really further your game, or did you just focus on beating this one person? That's pointless if you're not doing it the right way. If you're not doing it the way that your coach is asking. And that becomes we're emphasizing winning over learning. We have to emphasize learning over winning, for the long term. And so the more that a parent talks about that, let's go out and play like you always play. Let's see what you can learn today. What are your process goals today? And emphasizing winning is pointless if you don't play the way you're supposed to play. We gain nothing. We stand still in that regard, and if anything, we only postpone our ability to reach our full potential there. In terms of preparing a parent, pre-match, we've kind of talked around this, but realize there will be bad calls. Realize there will be some cheating. There will be some conflict out there. And I've come to the mindset, Josh, you know how there's like this algorithm, IFTTT, like if this, then that? I've decided to change it to WTTT, when this, then that, because there's no if. It's going to happen.
It's going to happen.
Right? And so, sort of the Marcus Aurelius quote with respect to equanimity reminded me of that. It's when, not if, right? So sort of when this happens, how do you want to respond? That's a good pre-match thing to connect with. Maybe we get lucky and today's a great day on the court. It's totally fair, totally respectful. But there are going to be days when something's going to happen. Do you have a pre-planned response that you have thought about, that maybe you've even visualized there, so that you can handle it at your best? Because it is difficult. It's tough to go out there and look at what's going on sometimes and not want to lose your mind over what's happening, and become sort of self-righteous about the whole thing. Any last things on pre-match?
Yeah, well, to in response to something that you were saying about having that sort of pre-planned response. All of these things are going to happen, right? There's going to be times where your opponent makes a line call that you disagree with. There's going to be times where you're not playing your best. There's going to be times where you miss shots that you don't think you should miss, and that's true for the player, but also definitely true for the parent, right? The parent is going to be experiencing all of that as well. So the parent can, I think, do two things: can have that conversation with their kid, help them have a game plan for how they want to handle those moments, but also the parent can think to themselves and try to have their own game plan for how they are going to handle it when they think that their kid is cheated, when their kid isn't playing their best. If their kid makes a line call that isn't right? And I think if the parent can also be a performer and also have that pre-planned response for these different situations, and really just think about what are all these different situations that can come up. The more that they can think that way, the more that they'll be ready. Not if it happens, but when it happens. Because if you play enough tennis, all of these things will happen. Guaranteed.
Absolutely. I guess maybe the last thing that we could, and it's on this topic, is now emphasize for your player being a good person first. Emphasize that, what are your expectations with respect to fairness and integrity and respect, and how they should respond when a bad call occurs. Because it's not really acceptable to cheat back, because you're a cheater too. In that regard, and it's hard not to do that. You'll feel like, oh, it's fair, and so forth, but that's a slippery slope that then we know bleeds into the rest of life. That's the way you conduct yourself. So it's actually a really good opportunity to see the strength of one's character if they're able to, avoid doing that and really stick to who they are and make it important to them that they stick with their core values. All right, so before we move into the in-match stuff, Josh, let's talk about our sponsor, Go Sport. So you can check out Go Sport at GEAUsport.com. GoSport.com. So Go Sports, it's a family-owned business in the United States. They specialize entirely on gear bags, so racket bags, duffel bags, backpacks, for tennis, for pickleball. The bags are made with really high quality premium fabrics and materials. They're rigorously tested for endurance. They have, the ability to customize with different sections in the bag. Much better than I've seen with other bags. Josh, it's really, really easy to do that. And I know you've got a bag. I've got a bag. Just would love to hear kind of your thoughts on what you've noticed with the quality of the bag and how you've used it.
Yeah, I've been really impressed with it. It definitely, you can, I think, just tell the quality of it just from holding it, from using it. It feels like it definitely is a tool to, help me stay organized out there with all the different compartments. And yeah, just it feels like a bag that I'm gonna have for a long time and be, really using it and enjoying it for a long time. And, I think I compare it to other bags that I've used in the past, which, I think tends to be racket brands, right? Where somebody's maybe using, the same branded bag, or a racket branded bag. And yeah, this just seems, I don't know, you can really tell that this is what they specialize in, right? I mean, I think with some of the larger companies that make rackets and grips and string and all these different things, and they also make bags. It just feels like with them, they've put a lot of Go Sport has definitely put a lot of thought into these bags, and I think from using it, from seeing it, you can really tell that.
For sure. So I've just been experimenting, like where do I put my rackets in here? I've been kind of moving things around just to see what works best. But yeah, I love the quality of the bag. I love the way it feels on my back. It's just like sort of very comfortable there. So, if you're in the market for racket bag, they have 9 racket bags, 12 racket bags, they have backpacks. Please go to gosport.com. So GEAU sport.com. And as a listener of this podcast, you can enjoy a 10% discount at gosport.com. You can just use the code TennisIQ10 when you're shopping at gosport.com. So please check out the site today. Take a look at some of the bags. And again, it's gosport.com, GEAU sport.com. So Josh, let's move on now to in-match. So this is truly where the parent is really going to face a big test here, because the match is going on the court. Maybe they're off to the side, maybe they're right on the side of the court. A lot of indoor clubs, you'll be maybe up above behind some glass. That's very different. What are some thoughts from you here about sort of in-match role of the parent, maybe some of the difficulties they can face and how to get through it?
Yeah, the parent is there to observe, to support, to cheer on, but is not a part of the match. The match is against, the match involves the people that are actually playing in the match, which, it's singles or doubles. And yeah, I think the parent ought to know that, not to even be reminded of that. And it's getting me thinking, could, a national governing body like a USTA in the US, or or other, or different governing bodies in different countries, could they send out something like that to parents, before tournaments, almost like little reminders? Could a tournament director mention something like that? But I think that's an important starting point. But yeah, there are definitely different challenges that parents can and will face out there, just like we talked about sort of with that pre-match stage, that preparation stage, being ready for that. During the match is when that all happens. And yeah, I think, remembering that they're performing, as we talked about earlier, is really key. I think trying to make sure that as a parent that they respond to different situations rather than react. Again, making sure that we're avoiding reacting and sort of showing that frustration or disagreement in different situations. I think something as simple as a deep breath in a tough moment can do a lot there. Um, and yeah, I think more so just again being able to observe, maybe taking notes, maybe just trying to notice, okay, again, not making it all about winning and losing, making it more about playing in the right way. Is my kid playing in the way that they are training to, that they're trying to, that they're working towards playing in a certain way? Are they doing everything that they can to play in that way? Right. I think for a lot of people, it's maybe they in matches compared to practice, maybe they don't hit through the ball as much, or they don't go through for their shots as much. I've been there. I've certainly been there in times where I've, you know, committed or said I committed to playing more aggressively or hitting more through the ball. And then when it's a match situation, I've gotten scared. And so, trying to recognize during the match, okay, well, what is my kid doing? Are they going for their shots? Are they playing in the way that they're working towards in practice, that their coach wants them to play in a certain way? Are they doing that, or are they playing to win right now? And I think this idea of winning now versus winning, versus building your game long term is really key, because what can win in the 10s or 12s or 16s is not necessarily always the same thing that a player needs to do to build their game long term. If a player is just focusing you know, on making the ball over the net and and almost just trying to make one more shot and not necessarily playing in the way that they really want to get to that next level. Yes, that might be successful right now, but can absolutely hold them back long term. So I think as a parent, it's to help bring maybe a different perspective than the kid may have. Right, the kid is going to have their own perspective from being out there, which is certainly a important and valuable one. But I think the parent can, during that in match time, can maybe gain a different perspective. Maybe they take a video at one point. Maybe they take some notes. Maybe they just remember what's happening during the match, so that when it's later reflected on, that they're able to contribute that different perspective. Not that they're telling their kid, "Oh, you should have done this or should have done that." But we could talk about that during the post match time. But that they're able to say, "Okay, well, here's what I saw."
I think the idea of being the observer is right on. I think I might take it one step further, Josh, and say, let's keep the notes to catching them when they're good. Very often it's about fix this, that went wrong, and if we can make it more about what the player did well, because we expect them to make mistakes, and you described even your own challenge, and I have the same challenge of occasionally getting scared and not playing the way exactly that you want to. We should expect that's going to happen. We don't want to, beat that to death at a certain point or get upset about it. It's totally normal. That's what tennis is there to teach us, to get through fear, to understand that fear should not be more important than doing the right thing. But that's a challenge we all have to go through. We've all been at a place where we actually let fear be more important than doing the right thing. So I would say, let's try, as we're observing, let's try to look for and make notes on what they did right, what they did well, and really emphasize that, when we get into the post-match piece. You mentioned the breathing and relaxation techniques, probably very necessary to practice that. Again, those are the skills of a performer. Performers, like, you would ask your player to go out on the court, maybe focus on their breathing and their body language. You must do the same out there. So we want to be, manage our body language. We want to be the role model in that situation. And, maybe one of the other things that we have to prepare parents for pre-match, Josh, isn't just like what's going to happen on the court. There are going to be some parents who don't follow what we're talking about, that
Yep.
are going to take things to a whole new level. And you have to be strong enough to not go there. Because the emotions of what is happening on the side of the court can very much make their way onto the court. Emotions are contagious. And it's important to know that as a parent, if you're reacting in a particular way, that you're transmitting that emotion. So we want to make sure we're transmitting the right kind of emotions. Or maybe we're just pretty stoic and we're just there. And occasionally, oh, let's go. You got this sort of thing. But nothing too high, nothing too low, just like we would ask of a player. I think we're both of the mindset that celebrating wildly is not is a suboptimal way of handling yourself after points, and because it often leads to poor body language and sulking and getting mad.
Yep.
So in the same way, we don't want players to be so up and down. We don't want parents to be so up and down out there. So there has to be sort of a balanced mind perspective, and working on that in the same mental skills and physical skills that your player is using, you probably have to learn too. I mean, maybe we should start a business, Josh, for mental skills coaching for parents, such that they can handle this a little bit better, because it's super hard to do this, right? And then I think the last thing, and this is in some of the other resources as well, is resist the temptation to get involved when things go wrong. It's not our role. It's not appropriate. It's also defined in various guidelines for parents at tournaments that they do not get involved, so forth. It was interesting you brought up something about like reminding parents of like their role that day. Now, these resources exist in the United States. And here where I live in New England, we're trying to resurrect them and to get them to be used more. So I'm probably going to get the words wrong, but there's like a player pledge and a parent oath, or a parent pledge and a player oath. And it's really about committing to sportsmanship and respect, good sporting behavior on this day. And we've used this in the past at tournaments to get players and parents to sign it, because there's some research that says when you sign something like this in the moment before you play, you're more likely to stick to it because you've made a pledge, you've made a promise to do this. Some sections of the US will have people do this online, and they'll do before the tournament at some point. That's less effective. So we're trying to bring back this idea of a parent and player pledge right before they play, so that they're reminded of what the expectations are. So in match, we want to make sure that we are not getting involved. Hopefully, pre-match, we have committed to knowing what our process goals are for today as a parent, and we stick with that. And again, coming back to our purpose, our role, it's to help the player learn to deal with the various challenges of life, which a tennis match, makes more obvious. Makes it more obvious that life isn't fair. Makes it more obvious that things are going to get in the way of you achieving what you want to achieve. How are you going to get through that? That's the parent's role, is to say, yeah, you know what? I've had similar situations, maybe not in tennis, maybe in something else. Let's work on how you can handle that better the next time. Anything else? Any other thoughts from you, Josh?
No, I think that all makes sense. Looking at Positive Coaching Alliance's guidelines, I like that they for one of the things during the game, or which would be during a match for tennis, they say, ask yourself, what do I want to model right now for my athlete? Which I think is a really important thing to recognize, right? To be that you're leading, that you have the opportunity to lead by example, right? And kids are sponges. They're gonna, even if you're saying one thing but you're doing something else, they pick up on that. They start to exhibit some of those same behaviors. And just like it's not, building, just like hitting a forehand is not innate, right? You're not born with the skill of hitting a forehand or hitting a serve. Or on the mental side of the game, people aren't just born knowing how to handle pressure or handle frustration or handle, or come back from an injury or do some of these different mental tools. the same is true of parents, right? It can't be expected that parents just automatically know how to handle some of these situations either. So it's a learning process. And I think as parents, it's also important to know that you're not going to be perfect and handle these situations the way that you want to every single time, because it's a learning process. And sometimes it takes a situation where maybe you feel that you didn't handle it the way that you want to learn from it. Just like it could take an athlete a tough experience to, for them to learn from it and have that learning experience so that they can handle it better in the future. So no part of what we're doing is to, set unrealistic standards or anything like that. I think it's about, hey, we're, just like the kid is trying to work on being the best that they can be. It's about trying to be the best that you can be and handle these situations as best as you can, knowing that they're often tough situations. It's tough seeing your kid, you know, feeling like your kid is maybe not playing the way that they are capable, or not playing in the style that they've been really working towards, or feeling like they're getting taken advantage of, right? In the cases of cheating or unfairness in, let's say, a high school team, right? Where maybe a high school coach isn't giving a kid, isn't maybe giving a kid an opportunity, or the kid doesn't make a team that they feel like they should make, or isn't getting starting time. And I think it's parents, it's tough to see that. But, I think ideally parents are able to, when the parent avoids getting too involved, when the kid is able to fend for themselves in certain ways, handle these tough situations by themselves because the parent doesn't get involved, they learn really valuable skills. They learn how to stand up for themselves. They learn how to, ideally treat somebody in the right way. Like, tennis, I think, as we've talked about, is not necessarily something that builds character skills, but it has the potential to. It has the potential to really help an athlete, and especially a young athlete, learn a lot of important life skills that they can use, certainly on the tennis court, but also certainly in other areas of life.
Absolutely. So let's move to the post match. And one of the things I wanted to talk about first, Josh, here was, how does the parent feel emotionally after the match? And again, we need to be prepared for this. We need to be prepared that possibly the player has had a bad day. How do we want to approach that? I think there's a danger here of a parent feeling embarrassed by their child's performance. Now, if we're embarrassed by a loss, that's maybe something. If we're embarrassed by their behavior, that might be something else. To me, regardless of what has happened out on the court, getting emotional about it, especially when it comes to embarrassment, is you making the match about you and not about the player. This match, I think we have to realize that this match is no reflection on you. If you take it that way, then I think you are valuing the opinions of other people more than the growth of your player, because they're gonna screw up. They're gonna do things that are embarrassing. Again, your role is to help them through that. I have dozens of examples of how I embarrassed myself. There are probably more than dozens, right? There are hundreds maybe in my junior tennis days. So I get it. It's hard to do this. You're gonna do stupid stuff, and you're a kid. You don't have an adult brain. And I think we have to keep that in mind, that there's a lot of cognitive development going on between 11 and really 25. That there are different stages there, different things that are happening. And, if we're using adult criteria for a child, we're making a mistake. So we want to make sure that our emotional response after the match is appropriate, such that The child wants to continue to play tennis because that's the biggest piece, that we want them to come back and say, yeah, I want to play another tournament. I want to play matches, because they know they're not going to get judged harshly at the end for a win or a loss. Behavior, of course, we don't prefer bad behavior, but we can work with it and address it because it's controllable. We can work on strategies and tools. But again, just thinking of my own career, there's lots of bad behavior. Eventually, I learned that I was only sabotaging myself with that. And so we want to make sure that our players understand that. So I think, to me, I have a lot of other things to talk about here, Josh, but I want to just get your thoughts about when parents make the performance sometimes a little bit too much about themselves and not about the ultimate goal of really helping their child develop.
Yeah, it's definitely, I think, something to be avoided, right? Where it's, I think parents often lead that conversation. So right after the match, literally within minutes or even seconds after seeing their kid, they start on, oh, well, why did you do this? Or why did this happen? Or, the parent starts trying to sort of correct or identify those behaviors that they think were wrong out there. Or not even behaviors, but just different things that they saw during the match that they feel like are wrong. And instead of that, I think, parents want to get to the place of allowing the kid to really lead that conversation. And, it's probably not seconds or minutes, right, after a match, because there needs to be some time to digest. Maybe that's an hour. Maybe that's a little more. I think people can figure out, maybe through some trial and error, what is the right amount of time. But having the chance to reflect, and maybe even a structure to reflect on a match, where the kid is not just listening to mom or dad tell them everything that they did wrong. I think if that is the format for how that post match conversation takes place, then it's really easy for the kid to stop enjoying the sport, for tennis to become stressful, and for ultimately them to maybe not want to play tournaments or not want to play the sport anymore. Where instead, if the kid is able to, when they're ready, which again, we could talk about the timing of that, talk about, okay, well, what was that like? What was that like for me? What did I do well out there? What are areas of my game where maybe I didn't do as well that I want to improve on? Were there certain things that I learned? Were there certain moments in the match that I felt like I really handled them well? And I can almost use that as an example going forward. Were there other moments in the match where, what, I wish I could have done that differently, and in the future I'm going to try to handle that differently. And if the kid is able to reflect on that, number one, I think that's a good way to process the match. But I think that they learn a lot from going through some sort of exercise like that, rather than the parent just coming in and telling them about everything that they saw from an outsider's perspective. By the way, that the sport looks a lot easier from behind that glass of an indoor facility or from behind the fence, on an outdoor court. It looks a lot easier. And I think anyone that's played the sport knows that. So again, letting the kid drive that conversation, and then the parent doesn't need to just sit there and take it all in and say, okay, sounds good. The parent can certainly bring up what they saw, but I think the more that it's led by the kid, the more that that you actually learn something from the match, and I think that the kid is able to really build important tools for the future. That
I think, going along with that, we have to realize that in general, kids are pretty hard on themselves, right? They're just as human as we are, right? With that sort of negative, critical self-talk that many of us have by default. Yep. So if we understand that, we don't need to pile on. They're going to be very tough on themselves. And in fact, maybe we need to help them be more realistic about some of it. So that was part of the reason I was trying to emphasize catching what's been good with them, because they're going to start most likely with everything that went wrong. And I do think it's a great idea to get them to start. If the parents start, then it usually becomes a pile-on of everything that went wrong, and they might be emotional. But the player should start because, again, this is a long-term development. And you know what? At first, the player may really not be quite very good at reflection. They may be unable to understand what they did well, or what needs work, or what they learned. But we keep the conversations going. They'll get better at that over time. And then you can bring in some things that you notice they did well. I do this all the time with athletes that I work with, that I notice they mostly don't focus on what they did well, but I'm listening to everything that they're saying. And then I might come back at the end, well, hey, you know what? You competed here. You just told me, like, yeah, all right, you weren't playing great, but you managed to pull out that match or pull out that set. That's something to celebrate there. You could have tanked. You could have stopped trying hard or changed your attitude, but no, you kept fighting, right? So we're always listening, and so parents should be as well. Let's listen for what's going right out there, kind of celebrate that, recognize that, because we want to repeat those things. Kind of going back to something that BJ Fogg talks about in his book, Tiny Habits. One of the things that we can do to motivate ourselves to continue good things is to celebrate them. To say, yeah, all right, no, that's like me to compete hard when I'm down in a match. So we want to, as parents, give them celebration opportunities so that they can repeat these behaviors. So I think that's really good in terms of like how we're speaking to them at the end. I think we've mentioned this before, but bringing curiosity and empathy to the process, especially when things maybe didn't go right. Recognize again that tennis is hard, that most players don't go on the court intending to act badly, intending to have a bad attitude, intending to lose and perform badly. So something must have happened. What was it? What were you thinking about? What happened there? Okay, how might we handle that better in the future, right? So to me, curiosity and empathy, very, very important. Again, understanding this is a process of learning and improvement. And then one thing I would like to add in, I think this again came from Positive Coaching Alliance, and this is a good, I think, role model, not only for your player, but also other parents, is to thank the tournament director and any officials that were there. You may not always agree with them, but as a sport, we need them. And we don't want to discourage people from taking on those roles by only complaining and getting upset. Because if tournament directors go away and officials go away, it's a lot harder to host these events,
Yep.
right? So they have, in some ways, a thankless job. And so if we can be the one to show gratitude, now you're showing your player, yes, I should be kind and grateful to these people. They play a necessary role in what is happening here.
Absolutely. Two things I wanted to add in. The first is, and we see these examples of, kids who, yeah, they don't act in the way that they want to out there. And I think for the vast majority of them, if you ask them a couple hours later, a couple days later, what happened out there, they can recognize, that's not how I want to be acting, right? It's easy to recognize that after the fact when they've calmed down, when they're able to kind of see it from a bird's eye view and sort of zoom out a little bit from the situation. But in the moment, it's tough. And I think anyone that's competed in tennis knows that it's tough to handle your emotions out there, to behave in the way that you want to. And, I think probably every tennis player has had times where they feel like they've done that really well and done that not as well. So I think, having some compassion about that, but also helping the player, have resources to build those skills, I think is really key because it's tough. So that's the first thing I wanted to add. And then the second piece, and I think you touched on this, I wanted to respond, is that I think for so many people, tennis players, junior tennis players, adult tennis players, people outside of tennis, I think people in general, it's really easy to notice what we do wrong, right? Especially when we have high standards for ourselves and compete at a high level. It's really easy to focus on, okay, well, I could have done this better, and this in this moment I didn't handle it as well as I wanted to, and why did I do that? And I think it's often a lot harder to really catch ourselves doing things right and give ourselves credit and recognize the many areas that we did well with. And I think being able to build that skill, and I use that word intentionally, of noticing the good, catching ourselves doing things right. As you said, Brian, saying, that's like me. And I think when we can do that, we are able to reinforce that type of behavior that we really want from ourselves or from our kids. And, rather than just taking it for granted and saying, oh, well, that's the way it's supposed to be. And taking the good for granted and focusing on what's wrong. I think, building that habit of really noticing what's right, catching ourselves doing things right. There's, a pretty simple exercise that I will often do with people. It's called a 3-2-1, where we start with what are three things that you did well out there. We always start there, whether you feel like it was a great match, a horrible match, or somewhere in between. You're always starting with what are three things you did well, and it sort of, I find it almost trains somebody to be able to catch themselves doing things right, be able to notice the good. You start there, and then it's what are two things you want to improve on. So it's not just two things I did badly, but it's more forward thinking towards the future. How can this match be something I can build on and improve on for the future? And then the one is, what is one thing that I learned? So three things you did well, two things you want to improve on, one thing you learned. But it starts with that three. It starts with, finding three things you did well, identifying those. And I think over time, people get better and better at catching themselves doing things the right way. Yes, that doesn't overlook that there's areas of improvement, that there's things that we want to do better for the future. And even something like that, by the way, can be something that parents can do with their kids. And I've seen parents, build that as a habit with their kid for that post-match reflection time, where, doing something like a 3-2-1 can be a really nice way for the kid to build that reflection skill, so that they're able to notice these different pieces, what they did well, what they're really happy with, what they want to improve on for the future, so that they're not satisfied with just, a certain level, but they know that they can take it to that next level and continue to get better. And then what did we learn? How can we make each match a learning experience for the future as well?
I think the 3-2-1 exercise, Josh, is also very useful just in life. That could be a dinner time conversation. Just going around the table and having everybody, including the parents, talk about three things that went well for them today, two things that need improvement, or I usually say, two things that maybe need some work. Yeah. And then, one thing that we learned today. Yeah, maybe some days you mix up the numbers. If that makes sense, right? Yeah. Just to kind of get really good at that. So, great conversation. So today we covered the role overall of parents on during a tournament match day. We talked about, what to say and do pre-match, in-match, post-match. And this concludes our series on tennis parenting. So if you have any feedback for us about these 3 episodes, we'd obviously love to hear it. You can get in touch with us at Tennis IQ Podcast. Sorry, let me get that straight again. So, Tennis IQ Podcast at gmail.com. You can email us there. So that's our show for today. And thanks for listening. Hopefully you've listened to the entire series. For more on today's episode, please check out the show notes, and we'll be sure to also include some links to the resources we mentioned today, or you can reach out to us. If you have any other feedback or questions just in general, please email us at tennisiqpodcast@gmail.com. Also, if you're enjoying the content that Josh and I discuss on the show, please rate and review the podcast so other tennis enthusiasts can find it more easily. Additionally, to be notified of new episodes, please subscribe to the show on your podcast platform of choice, including YouTube. And you can also check us out on Instagram. Thanks again, and we'll talk to you soon in our next episode.